Welcome back. This is a new segment that I call Heal Talk. And this segment is one that I will be doing consistently on a different basis with my guy, Dr. Joe. And part of this segment is to just have some heal talk. And instead of saying real talk, you're hearing that word, heal talk. So these conversations are just going to be your normal conversations with healing in between the lines. You got to read between those lines sometimes to get some of this healing. So, Dr. Joe, thank you for coming through. You know what this is about. We're doing a Heal Talk session. This is our first together, so I'm honored, brother. Thank you for doing this with me. And, before we started recording our session, we had a Heal Talk session
Yeah.
before the session. And part of this session that we wanted to talk about in our first Heal Talk is the wounds that men hold, the pain that we go through, and that tough exterior that says, just go through it.
Yeah.
Uh, we shared a little few insights with each other before this recording session, but I would love for you to come through, give us some blessings on this one, some gems,
Yeah.
and yeah, kind of bless our audience on some thoughts with this.
Oh man, we had a whole Heal Talk session before we push record, huh? um, it's interesting to reflect on essentially manhood or what it means to be a man, right? What it means to be what I would call God power, right? And as we go through life and we see other people who look like us and see how they handle it, and then we go through some similar things, and sometimes we try to handle it the way that they did, and often we realize that that don't work for us. Why? Because pain, hurt, wounds, it looks different for different people, right? It feels different for different people. And there are a couple of areas that I think there's a misconception in the world in terms of men, right? And one of the
Mhm.
areas is, and we were talking about it earlier, is the way in which men deal with relationships, right?
Mhm.
Um, I don't think people understand that a lot of times men become just as broken as women when a
Mhm.
relationship doesn't work, right? Um, Also, another area, and I always, when I'm speaking to like my little cousins or women that I talk to, I believe, and this is just my opinion, um, if a woman is dealing with a man that's insecure and not operating within their purpose, it's going to be a rough relationship. It's going to be a
Mhm.
rough relationship, right? Part of that is because for the man, there's some internal pain of, man, I'm nowhere where I feel like I should be right now, right?
Mhm.
And our professional life impacts our personal life, and our personal life impacts our professional life, right? And then there's one other area, right? So we talk relationship, we talk
Mhm.
career. One other area, and everybody might not be able to relate to this, but if you were an athlete, high school, college, professional, whatever, there's a transition that takes place. And oftentimes for men, transitioning from something they've been doing their whole life can keep them stuck because they have no idea who they are, identity, right? And
Mhm.
there's pain that comes with that when you're transitioning into another level of your life, but you're so used to doing something, right? So once again, we got relationship, we have career, and we have these athletes. And for men, that transition could be hard as hell because there's a lot of pain and deep wounds that operate
Mhm.
within us.
Man, you dropping some gems already, Dr. Joe, in this Heal Talk segment. And I think when you shared those different three levels that you mentioned, I kind of think about also men who kind of like maintain their own circumference of their bubble, and they almost look at it in a lens of their own protection, right? When really it I feel sometimes it can be their pain knocking on their door and they ain't realizing it because they think
Yep,
it's protection. Like, oh no, that's protection. No, that's pain knocking on your door.
that's right.
And then it also made me think. So that was one thought. But then it also made me think about like, man, why do our men harbor pain? Because we're so, men are so quick and easy to kind of point at maybe what females do on a consistent basis, right? And you could throw all those stereotypes out there that men might say of women. And I think there's another side of that with men, and if you could throw one of those stereotypes out, I would say it would be one of those right there. Like,
Yeah.
why you gotta hold on? Why are you harboring it? Why you just can't, you know what I'm saying? Or why do you harbor it and deliver it outward in the wrong way? So I know that's a few questions your way,
Yeah.
but to
Yeah.
to cap it, why are men holding on to it, Dr. Joe?
Yeah. So think about it, right? And a lot of times what we're hearing is the usual, right? Men are supposed to be protectors, providers, blah, 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 right? And I get that. I get that. But what happens when you're supposed to protect, when you're supposed to provide, when you're supposed to in a sense nowadays show emotions, right? Be more vulnerable, right? Which I love that, but what happens when you're supposed to do all this? There's pressure to do all that, but you're not comfortable with who you are, what's happening in your life right now, right? So now
Mm,
you put this mask on to be like, no, I'm good, I'm okay, but in reality, that's not real, right? And so many of us we hold on to this stuff and we don't really share out, right? We don't share out because we never, here comes another stereotype, we never want to seem as though we're weak or we don't have it together.
mm,
And the real and the reality is a lot of people are weak and they don't have it together. But when I say weak, they're weak because they're struggling with the pain and the woundedness and the trauma. They're struggling with all that. It's not that you're a weak person, it's just
mm.
that you're dealing with a lot of times the stuff that's natural that so many of us deal with. And sometimes you have men that are dealing with a lot more, right?
Yeah.
And so we hold on to those things and essentially we're a ticking time bomb.
Mm. Yeah. Beyond like the harboring and the holding on to, and those are great, great thoughts of like, the reasons and maybe the releasing. I think there's also inside of us, inside men, there's just this aesthetics that has been crafted, right? And you could date it back to some like caveman stuff, right? Like the level of like what it was created as, the evolution of men as it continued, and it always surrounded itself with a exterior of toughness, right? A level of like brute. I guess I want to say like being a brute almost, right? And those are things that are like so embraced by men, like, yeah, take that on, like, let me, it ain't okay to just have like a little Swiss Army knife. Let me get that big ass machete over there, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm a man. I got, it
Yeah.
got to be bigger, right?
Yeah.
Why? I guess why, or not why? That's not where I'm going with this. Since it's so deeply embedded, Dr. Joe, right? If we speaking all the way dating back to cavemen, dinosaurs, like it's so deeply embedded. And I do see that generationally and the times have changed. And I do feel men have changed as well in some of those ways. But some of those old ways are still running deep. So if it's so embedded from such a distance way, and we have grown, but we have still stayed in the same spaces, I mean, how do men like still identify in that if that's what they need to be, right? But get past it as well.
You know, I want to say that unfortunately, some, not all, unfortunately, some of us have to hit rock bottom in order for a light to come on to say, I got to deal with my stuff and I got to figure out how to get past. Because once you hit rock bottom, oftentimes you're willing to do anything to get back to at least right baseline level, right? You're
Hmm.
willing to do anything. And I'm gonna say this because I don't know about you, but I felt like I've hit rock bottom before, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things that I decided to do while hitting rock bottom, I told myself, I only know what I know, and what I know has gotten me to this point, right?
Mm,
And so what I had to do was I had to finally be vulnerable enough and open enough to say, I am going to commit to somebody else's process that can help me get through this, right?
mm.
But that's another piece of it. We don't like to ask for help, right? One of the worst things we could do as men, we're going to say, yo, you know what? I'm a man. I'll figure it out.
Hmm.
But you can't figure certain things out on your own, right?
Yeah,
So when you're able to trust yourself that asking for help is the best thing for you, and then you commit to somebody else's process that can actually get you through whatever storm you're going through, that's when the true man starts to emerge.
for sure, man. And I think there's always going to be a level of holding on to those caveman ways, whether it's a 2%, 1%, a 0.5%.
Yeah,
And some of that resonates in you. You might, go for a walk in the woods, and all of a sudden you're feeling like this urge in the woods. That can be that tapping into you from that distance, right? And I think as we evolve as men and become more open-minded, open-hearted, right? Like for example, like my grandfather used to have my mom iron his drawers,
mm,
right? Just very, and that was the oldest child's job,
right, right.
right? If I asked my oldest son to iron my drawers, he'd look at me like I'm crazy.
Hey,
He'll talk.
look,
He'll talk.
my boys would be like, they'd be like, hey, yo, like they just be like, yo. I'd be like, all right, don't do it.
Sure, but if you think about just that concept right there, we're talking about a man who was born in the early 20s, right? It's 1920s. So that was the man he was. He had 12 children, they all had jobs, right? But he was specific in what a woman did, right? And in those kind of stereotypes and that machismo that he held. I mean, don't get me wrong, my grandfather was an amazing
Right,
man,
right, right.
right? But when I think of like just some of those barbaric, old school, and I say this with full respect, man, ways that we adapted to because we evolve as men. And it starts off this way, right? And then it becomes another way. And then, it should be that each generation learns, like, my grandfather learned from his father, his right. It should go that way. But I think there's also spaces where that movement and that learning trajectory moves even faster. Meaning, right, as I shared with you in our heel talk we had before this heel talk, being a fatherless child, right? I'm a fatherless child, which really instilled in me not to say, I'm going to do that to another young male that I create. What
Yeah,
it did to me was say, all right, that is not me. I'm going to be a kick ass father. That is my jam. Right. So the trajectory changed because, my father's father wasn't a great father.
mm,
So in saying that, as we move, and I love what you said, there's this self-work, and it's always some self-work, right,
yep,
Dr. Joe? And as you go through that self-work and identify and let go some of those fears as a man, not ask for help. I talked to a brother the other day who did a segment with me, and he said one of the most beautiful things we can do as men with each other is just say, "Yo, I appreciate you,"
yep.
but we can't say that shit unless there's some transaction.
or,
So,
or
Dr. Joe, he'll talk. I appreciate you. We don't even have to do a transaction.
right,
But I
right,
guess
right.
thoughts around that.
I mean, think about it. Like I get a little frustrated with people, men specifically, in the current day where they'll say something like, "Bro, I love that fit. You looking good. No homo." Or pause. Like really? Like just it's okay to compliment. It's
Mhm.
okay to give. But I think men for so long have been around so many broken men, and so the representation that they were getting on what they
Mm,
feel like they should be was not real, right? So
mm,
we haven't been around enough healed, right? Or let me say it like this: we haven't been around enough men that work on themselves in a real way, right?
yeah.
Therefore, we don't even know what it looks like, because when we do see somebody that looks like that, we say, "Oh, he corny, bro. He's square ass." Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we start to
Mhm.
call them certain names because they don't look broken like all the other men that we're so used to being around. You feel
Mm.
me?
Yeah, no, I definitely feel that. And I feel like, a big part of like what we're sharing, I identify that there's just things that are deeply embedded in us as men, whether it's the competitiveness in us, right? And that's not universal because there's some men who ain't competitive. They just don't tap into that source, right? But there's just these natural abilities when you think of the DNA of a man and men, um, and the things that we're just like made of, right? And then there's the things that we take on from our DNA of our mother and our father, and then there's the things that we take on from our environment, and then there's the things we take on just in our own self discovery. And as we keep taking these things on and taking these things on, I feel sometimes, Dr. Joe, as men, we get lost in that shit,
For sure.
like in a time warp of taking on, losing your identity and trying to be someone else. You start looking in the mirror and features look different. And you're like, you're losing yourself in that. And I guess for me, and we get at the end of our segment of heel talk here, in the heel talk piece of this, my heel talk of this, and I'll pass the mic to you, Dr. Joe. The heel talk in this conversation is really that self-discovery of man as you
Mm-hmm.
go through your self-discovery. And what I'm meaning of self-discovery, my definition of that is really looking within yourself, beyond looking in the mirror, beyond hearing what the closest person to you says about you. How about identifying that with someone who's not as close to you, getting that 360 evaluation feedback of you as a person. We do that a lot in the work world,
Yep.
but we don't do that in the personal world. That's my heel talk. Find someone like that who can give you some heel talk to yourself and say, hey, you come off like this, right? And that's kind of what I'm getting from this heel talk conversation, Dr. Joe. I'm gonna pass you the mic. What you getting
Yeah.
from this?
I mean, think about it. I think you made an extremely valid point. And I remember I used to hear people say, in a sense, treat relationships like a business. I didn't understand that. And then when you get into a relationship, you're like, okay, I kind of see what you mean, right? But to your point, you're talking like we always go and receive this professional development and feedback and mentorship, right? In that area, how come we're not doing it in this particular area, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you're right, and I would argue that it, we have to understand as men that all of us, men and women, we have feminine and masculine energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think as soon as men hear the word feminine, they're like, oh, no, 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 no. Feminine energy and masculine energy. And for so long, we've opted to be on the so much on the side of just our masculine self and our masculine energy that we
Mm-hmm.
forget, if we tap into some of our feminine energy, it helps to balance us out and we move in the world differently, right? And until we get around people who, what I say, are winning and working on self, right? So they're working on self and they're also winning in life. And we get to see that visual. Then we're like, I wonder what they're doing that I'm not doing. And then we
Mm-hmm.
gravitate to it, right? And so for
Yeah.
men, we need to get around more men, once again, who are working on themselves, who are winning. We're not scared to talk. We're not scared to talk about our wins, and we're not scared to talk about where we can be better and do better,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we just don't do that enough. And that's why, when you get around people, men specifically, because we're talking men, when you get around men who exude, to me, confidence and purpose, and I'm doing my thing, but I still got a lot of work to do when I can, right? Because I don't gravitate to, oh, they're a millionaire, they got a big house and a nice car. I gravitate to, what have you been through to get there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's the work. And so as men, if we do more of that and understand, once again, feminine and masculine energy, and also understand you can be one way, put in the work, and transition to being another way. That evolution
Mm-hmm.
process is real, but you got to commit to it.
Man, that's heel talk.
There you go.
That's heel talk. And I appreciate you, Dr. Joe. I think part of this segment is all part of the Men, Mind, Body, the blueprints of well-being for the month of April. We're having a bunch of different segments for our men, but this one is all about bringing Dr. Joe into space. Dr. Joe has a lot of gems to share with our people, so it was important for me to have a segment that speaks to that. But also, Dr. Joe and I have these different conversations like this that are really impactful, and I think it's great to have him in this space where we can grab healing and let it meet talking and actually have some heal talk. So people, take care of yourself. We will holler next time on the Heal Talk segment. And Dr. Joe, you keep on taking care of people, take care of yourself, and we will see you next time, people. Peace.